Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nate Sager.
Before Auston Matthews, there was another U.S. star who wore number 34 for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And 20 years ago, almost to the day, his promising hockey career was derailed in an instant. A life was interrupted for a young American from Rhode Island. Bryan Berard was developing into a top-flight NHL defenseman who could score, make plays, and get rough too if that's the way you wanted it. Realizing the visions that hockey minds saw when they watched him in high school and then again in junior playing in Detroit, he was drafted first overall in 1995 and at the end of that season had won the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year. This night, the dynamic puck-moving blue liner, a breath of fresh air that many had called for during the dead puck era, was skating with the Leafs to close out the regular season. They had a game against the Ottawa Senators on Hockey Night in Canada. The date was March 11th, 2000. They were the top two teams in what was then the Northeast Division and had met the previous season in the playoffs. They were only 5 points apart and in the throes of an intense rivalry in which they would meet in the playoffs 4 consecutive seasons. It was a postseason precursor. Those that follow hockey know what happened next. But for those that didn't, I'll keep it brief. A broken play in his own zone resulted in sends forward Marian Hossa wheeling around blindly to fire at a loose puck on net from the far circle. He missed and hit Berard squarely in the right eye with his blade, permanently blinding him. Berard had just celebrated his 23rd birthday 6 days earlier. Today, there's no visor debate. It's become mandatory to wear one, and that started in the 2013-14 season. Except for those who have been using the grandfathered exception, most prominent being Big Z Zdeno Chara. And I imagine kids look at him the same way I looked at a helmetless Harold Snepps, Al Secord, or Craig McTavish. They were old wooden stakes in the ground in an onrushing tide of change. I digress. The 1999-2000 season, it was commonplace to have no visor, and the debate often flared up, most notably on Coach's Corner, as to the need for one. What happened to Bryan Berard was so disturbing because it was the realization of a nightmare for players and fans. Anyone who'd ever played or watched the game at any level had seen or felt a stick come close and breathe a sigh of relief. Unfortunately for Berard, he was not so lucky. But that's not where his story ends, not by a long shot. Amazingly, even though written off, Berard made his way back to the NHL, repaying his $6 million insurance settlement to do so, and went on to play more than half the 619 games that comprised his career with the league minimum 2,400 vision until he retired after the 2007-2008 season. When all was said and done, he played for 6 NHL teams, including 4 original 6 clubs, and was awarded the Bill Masterton Trophy in 2004. Masterton was the only NHL player to ever die on the ice as a result of an injury, and the trophy in his honor is given at the end of each season at the NHL award ceremony to the player that shows perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to the game. Today, Bryan is back in New England, where he works for Whale Rock Partners, a financial advisory firm. And on October 29th, he released his biography with Jim Lang. It's titled Relentless: My Life in Hockey and the Power of Perseverance. It covers his early life, where he emerged as the Rocket from Woonsocket, through his NHL career, which started controversially in Ottawa, the 1998 U.S. Olympic team, and subsequent scandal, steroids, the Wild Wild West KHL first season of which he was a part of, being swindled financially, mental health, and his family. What is most obvious, though, is that his injury may have altered his life, but it never clouded his head or heart. He actually absolved Marian Hossa immediately and seems grateful for everything he has had. It's a break probably from what people thought of him when he entered the league as this young punk kid who'd forced a trade out of Ottawa. He was gracious enough to join us via telephone. And before we get him, Nate, I was with you the day we learned of his injury. We were listening to the game on the way back to Kingston from calling a university hockey game in Waterloo. What do you remember about that night, and what was your takeaway from reading Bryan's memoir?
Yeah, first and foremost, I do remember we had called a university hockey playoff game for CFRC 1019 back in Kingston, and we'd stopped off, I think, so, for a bathroom break. The 401 was virtually empty that night because there was a snowstorm, the same snowstorm that would keep Bryan's parents from being able to get him into the hospital right away. And I think I came back out to the car, and you kind of looked at me and you just said something like, Berard just got his face broken. Like, you didn't, Joe Bowen was trying to, his best to describe it on the radio without being over the top or sensational while still communicating that this was a really serious, catastrophic injury. And at the time, the assumption was, because people were generally aware that the NHL does have a requirement to have a minimum amount of vision in each eye, that this was career ending. And against all odds, he did come back, as we know, because we're sitting here today about to talk to him. In some ways, Bryan Berard and his collaborator, friend of the pod, Jim Lang, have produced a very Generation X hockey autobiography. By that, what I kind of mean is, ours is the Generation X is the generation that sort of almost as a reflex or defense mechanism is always kind of looking for the other shoe to drop. One doesn't necessarily get the sense that Bryan Berard is, hung up on, what ifs or what might have been, or, the Toronto Maple Leafs trainer who was with him in the hospitals, plural, that, night, March 11th and 12th, 2000, says Berard, never let himself, say, why me? So in keeping with that, in the spirit of that, as heavy as the subject matter is, he and Jim Lang produced a book that's, very fast and digestible. The initial reaction was, well, you're allowed to wallow a little. Like, I mean, you're only human. But that the way they went through it actually worked on a couple levels. Since once I, did that speed read, I started rereading over to formulate what we could ask him about. And I felt a lot of compassion for him as a sports human, because his story is really illustrative of the fact that even though you can conquer the incredibly long odds to become a number one pick, it's not all going to be, easy street once you get there. Berard, came up at a time when someone with working class roots in a town like Woonsocket, Rhode Island, where his father supported the family as a mechanic, and his mom, did the books and helped, and they raised a blended family of, I guess, 6 kids. You could come from that kind of background and still make it into competitive hockey, and that in itself is a triumph. But I mean, the odd, even once you make it to the NHL, it's not always going to be guaranteed to end well. I think I looked it up. Only 11 defensemen have ever been a number one pick since the NHL went to a true entry draft. And only one of them has actually gone on to win the Stanley Cup with that team, the great Dennis Potvin with the New York Islanders, who Berard started and ended his NHL days with, I believe. So Berard had all these what-ifs in his career, like eye injury. He came back from multiple back surgeries. And you really get the sense of, how hard it is to just find that ideal situation and have it, sustain itself. I mean, pouring over his career, he might have only really had that twice. His draft year with the Detroit Junior Red Wings in 1994-95, when he got that ideal situation for a 17-year-old, be a key part of a really good team where, not everyone is going to be focused on stopping you every night, because there's good older players on the team that you can, feed off of. And that showcased him for the NHL draft. And he probably had that when he got to Toronto, because Pat Quinn had been a defenseman. He I think understood how to coach a young defenseman and, live with the mistakes and stuff. But yeah, so anyways, I'm getting off topic a little, but there are so many twists of fate to Berard's hockey days, and so many of them that really have to be understood in the context of what the NHL was like before the 2004-05 lockout, when Gary Bettman basically, had the opportunity to remake the league in his own vision. He was an American prospect who came up before there was the U.S. National Team Development Program. Maybe his game would have grown differently if it had those, 2 years, I guess, in Ann Arbor or Plymouth. It's hard to believe that, now that an NHL team would trade a 21-year-old defenseman who was 2 years out from winning the Calder Trophy. Like, that would never happen now with, team control and entry-level deals and all that. And likewise, Berard doesn't present it as a misfortune. He played for three flagship U.S. markets, New York, Chicago, and Boston, but it was all while those teams were kind of like in down cycles. Like, to play for the Chicago Blackhawks in the early 2000s meant a whole different thing than it did, say, 10 years later, when coincidentally the player he's forever linked with in history, Marian Hossa, was helping them win 3 Stanley Cups. Although I always remember Marion Host as the guy who got the Thrashers to the playoffs. We all have those what might have beens, but at the end of the day, you can't let those consume you. And I think that is the lesson, to take out of Bryan Berard's life and times. It seems that he's found some haven and security in his second career, and we're grateful that he's second to none in joining us as an ex-player guest on SportsLit, Neil.
Thanks a lot, Nate. And yes, coming up, Bryan Berard. All right, we're joined by Bryan Berard, who is gracious enough to talk with us today. And Bryan, are you in Providence? Is that where you are?
I am. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island right now. Correct.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us again. And I want to know why you chose to do the book at the time you did and how that came to fruition.
Great question. And again, thanks for having me, guys. It was probably in the works for a few years, to be honest. After Ty Domi came out with his book, and I thought it was really well done, obviously with Jim Lang, and he was a pleasure to work with. Ty kind of set me up with Simon & Schuster, Kevin Hansen. We met in New York, and I don't think the timing was great yet. And kind of talk about in the book a little bit. It has to do with more about my financial advisor, committing fraud and certain aspects of that kind of, I guess, kind of delayed the process a little bit. But we thought that the timing was right. We kind of sat down, and actually me and Jim we went through it pretty good. I mean, to me, it was a great experience. Again, it was a lot of fun working with Jim. And one of the things that, people asked was it tough to kind of go back and reminisce about the injury in Toronto there. And it wasn't. It was really a pleasure to do this book. I really kind of wanted to get my story out there. Not necessarily just a sports or a hockey book, but it's got some good life lessons in it as well.
In terms of the business of doing a sports book, I mean, we often have the authors on as opposed to the athlete. So I'm just wondering if you could explain behind the scenes how that works. Most people who will read this book will go to the bookstore, pick it up on Amazon, and probably if they are thinking about it, they'll say, okay, Bryan decided he wanted to do a book, found an author, and they did it. But how does the business of that work, and like the publisher finding you, perhaps giving you an advance? Like, how does that all work?
Obviously it's my first book, so I was kind of lost at first. And, I reached out to Ty and said, I'd like to write a book and get my story out there. So I had some help, obviously, with him, and he kind of gave me a heads up of just start writing a lot of things down, a lot of stories I could remember. I talked to my mom, and she had some great things as well, and really just started writing things down. And then, obviously, the co-author with Jim Lang, he did some great research, and really we just sat there and chatted and talked. We met in person a few times in Toronto, and then a lot of phone conversations, and kind of he jarred some memories and some stories as well. And really we just talked a few times a week, and just kind of probably took about 8 months to get the book. I guess written and wrote. So it was a good process. I mean, it's obviously the business side as well. So I think towards the end, once you finish the book, that the thing go through the publishers would have to deal with the lawyers and things like that because they don't want to get sued as well. So it's obviously it was a new experience for me, and it was fun doing.
In terms of, I talked to Jim yesterday a little bit about this, and he's been on the podcast before for some of his other books, or one of his other books. I wanted to know essentially the marketability. I mean, this must have been different for him. It was new for you, but when you're making a book like this and you're doing promo, let's say, are you picking certain spots? I know you played for 4 original 16s, but in the States, did you have to pick certain spots to do the promo? Was it Woonsocket? Did you go to, Manhattan, Chicago, Boston, that type of thing?
We actually, I haven't done things like that yet. And to be honest, I expected Simon & Schuster to kind of do, I guess, a little bit more book signings. But I guess nowadays, a lot of people just order from Amazon, and the bookstores are kind of, I guess, people aren't out in bookstores as much as before. So I really just kind of picked some podcasts. Obviously, Spit Chicklets. I went on NBC with Ronick and Anson Carter. I traveled to New Jersey, went on NHL Tonight or NHL Live. in the studios there, which was pretty cool. So I just kind of reached out and talked to Jason Strudwick at TSN. So just kind of reached out to some ex-players and kind of did my own marketing and PR and really just tried to get the book out there. Obviously, in the States, hockey books are a lot tougher to sell than up in Canada. So, I'm still. Both me and Jim are still kind of working hard as trying to get the book out there because we really thought it was well done, and Jim did such a great job of kind of transferring my story into the book.
And Bryan, I always sometimes hesitate to reduce things to like one sort of maxim or one principle, but how much is your story the way you've chosen to tell it about how one can adjust to a new normal in life?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like my whole career was kind of, obviously the injury being the worst part, but I mean, obviously, getting drafted first overall, and I had, talk about in the book, but I had the situation with Ottawa where a lot of hockey fans and fans in Ottawa and Canada thought that, I was a spoiled American kid that didn't want to play in Canada, which was totally untrue. Obviously, I played in the OHL, the Interior Hockey League. I did play in Detroit Junior Wings, but, I enjoyed Canada. Toronto was my favorite city that I got to play in. I think, obviously we had a really good team and a really great locker room. And still today, I think a lot of people think that I'm Canadian because I played junior. So it kind of went, from there, and then I got traded to New York Islanders, and then, the tough times with the Islanders and dealing with Milbury, and then getting and I'm very friendly with Milbury, but at that time it was kind of up and down. Then obviously being an offensive defenseman with my career getting kind of, I guess, labeled as I couldn't play in my own zone or wasn't, was a liability defensively that kind of, to be honest, it irked me a little bit, pissed me off. Because I thought, when I was playing great offensively, I was also up in the play, and my gap was great, as most defensemen would know, and I thought I could play in my defensive zone. So it was just kind of, the confidence in sports, I think, is a big thing, and that's what kind of my career was up and down a little bit. And then going to Toronto was kind of, getting traded to Toronto, especially that year. Closed the Maple Leafs Gardens, opened up Air Canada Center, playing with Mats and, Cujo and Steve Thomas, and we made a deep run into the playoffs. Then obviously the eye injury, and then kind of after that, making a pretty good solid comeback and really not being the player I once was. And then obviously teams kind of really didn't want to sign me to a long-term deal, so it was kind of like I was bouncing around. Obviously, I get to play in some great cities, and I was lucky that way, but I didn't really stick around a place too long, so it just seemed like every year was a kind of a new start for me. So it was at times it was a frustrating career, but I still got to do what I loved, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
You covered a lot of ground in your last answer there, so the question I was going to ask, I'll hold off on, and I'll ask you, explain to somebody who just maybe remembers you casually as, okay, this young kid's coming in, he's kind of like Lindros, and he doesn't want to sign with Ottawa. Can you explain what the situation was, the nuts and bolts of it with the CBA, and what actually happened there, to put it in perspective for people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was pretty simple contract to get done because I was the first player, in 1995, all of us were the first player under the rookie salary cap. So it was a very simple, especially being drafted first overall. I mean, it was pretty much laid out. And then we had all the bonuses that obviously that we could work out, but obviously they're performance bonuses. So if a player does reach those, you should get paid accordingly. And my agent, Tom Laidlaw at the time, and Randy Sexton was the GM in Ottawa. And unfortunately, that time Ottawa was a different organization. They were struggling. They were trying to build a new arena. They had Alexander Daig and Radek Bonk, Yashin was there. Just seemed like it was a very, divided locker room as well. So when I got there as an 18-year-old player, for me, I wanted to play as an 18-year-old. Being drafted first overall, I thought I was ready to make that jump and play as an 18-year-old. So I think for me it was a little ego hit too, because we were, started camp and things were going pretty well, and I thought I could have made the roster. And it just, we kind of caught wind that they were going to send me back to junior anyway, more not because of the hockey, it was because of the business, and they really didn't feel like paying me that season or even a signing bonus, which would have been, I think, $425,000, and then I would have earned the $425,000 because I think we were capped out at $850,000 max for the rookie years. You basically signed a deal for $2.4 million over 3 years, I believe it was, or maybe a little bit more. And so we just really couldn't get a deal done. And then we found that out. So my agent said, let's just go back to junior. You're going to go back anywhere, work on your game, get a little stronger. And really just my agent and the general manager at the time, Sexton, nothing was getting done or really getting along. So we went back to junior and kind of asked for a trade, and then kind of, I guess the rest is history. I think Sexton ended up getting fired. They brought in, I believe, Pierre Gauthier, I believe. That's who came in as general manager. And I think he traded me right after Christmas.
Going back to even before that, I mean, you came, for those of, I mean, we're about your age. We're in our early 40s. And so, we remember a time, especially here, when, there was no U.S. development program. And, guys like you, Modano, even Chelios to some degree came to play. I mean, I guess you played in Detroit, but essentially the CHL, and didn't go the college route. And there's mention in the book about how your mom and I think your dad too wanted you to play in college. Could you explain how U.S. hockey has changed and why that is, why it's become, a more feasible option now to come out of university hockey or college hockey, as they say in the States, and play in the NHL and maybe the emergence of the U.S. development program?
Definitely. USA Hockey's done an amazing job. I mean, for myself, there's guys like, Jeremy Roenick, Matthew Schneider. There's a few guys maybe before me that was unheard of to go play in the CHL. For me, it was a no-brainer. I actually really wanted to go my underage year. We went up and saw a game, and my mom was like, it was funny because the brawl broke out. It was like a 5-on-5. It was like Todd Harvey, a bunch of guys, Eric Carnes. Were on that Detroit team, and a pretty tough team, and it was, I think it was against Windsor, and it was a 5-on-5. My mom's like, "You're not ready for this, no way, I want you to get your college education." And my dad and myself kind of looked at each other and smiling. And so my dad, he left it up to me. It was my mom that really wanted me to get an education, and at that time I didn't graduate high school yet either. So the following year, my mom said, "If you graduate high school early, we'll go from there." And my goal was to play in the CHL, and definitely the OHL. Honestly, there was no development program, but back then, the U.S. had, you make select 16s, you make select 17s. So, I got to play against Redden, Ginla, Doan, all these guys that, pretty much were ranked right up there with me. And I know those guys were going to play junior. And I told my dad, I said, if I'm gonna make a career out of this and be a top player, I thought at that time was the best way to play, adapt to the NHL and play in the NHL. I wanted to play against these guys. I know those guys were in the WHL, but, I know I wanted to play in the OHL against Chad Kilger and guys like that were my draft year. So for me, it was an easy decision. And then once, with the organization that CompuWare had with Detroit Junior Wings, I got my first general manager was Jimmy Rutherford. My first head coach was Paul Maurice. Second season, my coach was Pete DeBoer. So those guys were great coaches, still coaching in the NHL today. So the organization was a great place for me to start and begin, I guess, my professional career. As far as the USA program is done, I'm actually now involved with, seeing some of these players with my old high school, Mount St. Charles Academy. We started 4 academy teams as U14, U15, U16, and U18 teams. Just doing some player development, but these young kids now are so skilled, and that USA Hockey has done such a tremendous job of producing players that they're fun to watch. So it's, to me, I mean, it's right there now. I mean, USA and Canada, even Finland and Sweden, all those top countries are producing some very talented and skilled players. It's great for hockey.
You were there then. You remember when the U.S. development program was created. Do you know what was the catalyst behind it, like how it got funded, that type of thing, and maybe the reaction of people when it did get formed to what it could do?
To be honest with you guys, I don't. I know it was probably maybe 5 or 6 years after I was after playing select 16, 17, maybe 4 or 5 years. I know like Ryan Whitney and a few of those guys were kind of the first guys, I believe, to play in that development camp. So I really didn't know too much about it. By that time, I was kind of old enough and probably already playing in the league. So I really didn't pay too much attention to it. Really, since I've just been retired, is how I've kind of paid attention. Obviously with Kane, and then even now, I mean, you get the Chuk boys. Obviously, I played with Big Walt there and the Olympics and stuff. So it was fun. It's just fun to see some of these players now come up through the U.S. Development League and then being stars in the NHL.
And how much you mentioned the work you do, sort of evaluating kids. How does that compare? how does that and the the counseling and advice they get compare with the way you and your parents had to approach the big time hockey development system, when you were, a teenager in Woonsocket?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. I mean, obviously I went junior early. I knew I was going to, forbid my college and NCAA eligibility. So the agents were pretty much recruiting me right out of high school. So we kind of had some help there early on with the agents, and obviously now they call them advisors. And I was lucky enough and blessed enough where I was, basically, high draft pick and then played in the NHL at 19 years old. So I think it's tough. I mean, these families now, it's a tough decision. College hockey, it seems now, is picked up a little bit. For me, it was just that college doesn't, I think off the ice they develop you as far as, in the weight room and obviously going to school and a routine. But you're just not, for me, you're just not playing enough games. I wanted to play, closer to an NHL roster, NHL season. Junior obviously played 66 games, and then you have playoffs and stuff. So to me, it seemed like that was the way to prepare better for my path to the NHL. But now the college kids like Eichel and these guys, they're coming out of college and they're jumping right into the NHL. And they're putting on a show right away. So it's really impressive to watch.
The economics of hockey has changed drastically, and the book talks extensively, or you're right in the book extensively about growing up working class, your dad working with his hands in the garage, and how tough it was. Do you think, given the same circumstance, you could have made it today? Given how expensive sticks are, personal coaching, all that stuff. And what do you think about the way the game has moved in that regard for young hockey players?
To be honest with you, it's insane. My parents, no way. My father, and I talk about in the book, but my dad probably made close to $50,000 a year, working very hard, being at the shop from 6 a.m. and coming home at 7 at night, raising 6 kids. Me and my brother played hockey as well. My younger brother played hockey as well. So there's no way he could afford it today. Even back then, my mom was pretty much traveling with me when we played, and my dad kind of was coaching. My younger brother was a goaltender, my brother Greg. But, even back then, and I talk about this in the book, and I give a lot of praise. I was lucky enough that myself and Brian Berard, obviously, playing the NHL and great career, the goaltender, and now at NBC Sports, between the benches. But we grew up in the same town, and his father, Mr. Boucher, who's passed, and his mom as well. But they were amazing to me. They're like second parents to me. He had a successful construction company growing up here in Woonsocket. So a lot of times, obviously pay for the tournaments and stuff. My parents, I would just go with them, just to make it easier for my parents to be home with the other kids. And Brian's siblings were all older. So I just went along with Mr. and Mrs. Boucher and Brian and driving up to either Montreal or some tournaments in his big Cadillac. And it's a lot of great memories. And he did a lot for me as far as that. And I probably wouldn't be able to make it if it wasn't for them as well. I know my parents did as much as they could possible, but it's tough. And now I have a nephew in the game. I don't have any children yet, but my younger brother Bruce Bryan Berard, who's a 09, I believe he is. He's 10 years old. He'll be 11 this year. Already a good player, big defenseman. Getting invited to all these tournaments. And my brother's probably spending, I would say anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 a year on him at a 10-year-old. And I just can't believe it. It's just, the game has changed, and it's almost like it's not a middle-class sport anymore. These parents are spending a lot of money to see their kids play hockey. Do you see that potentially already changing the culture of the NHL and who is in the NHL and kind of the way they view potentially, I wouldn't say hard work, but does that tie into kind of, I know here in Toronto, a lot of people will say, hey, the guys on the team are prima donnas, Do you think that might tie into the backgrounds they come from now? I don't think so. It's just every sport does it. It's just, every sport from lacrosse to soccer to baseball, everybody's playing, season-long sports now. They're just at a young age. My father didn't let me play hockey in the summertime. He's like, you're hanging the skates up, and I played baseball. So, I was basically off the ice from probably April, May till September, and playing other sports. And I think, people forget about that. I think as I was lucky enough, I was a pretty good athlete. So, and I played every sport. Football outside, basketball, wiffle ball, everything. And I think until a certain age, I think the more sports you play, and I think the sport that you're gonna, I guess, progress in, it's better for you. Definitely become a better athlete, and hand-eye coordination and things like that. I think parents just get, obviously college is so expensive now, and a lot of parents want to push their kids that maybe can play in the pros, and it's just, it's such a big business that I think parents, I've seen it going to these hockey games. Parents are crazy. Parents are crazy. They really are. But it's sports. And hockey's a great game. But I don't think it has anything to do with how much money you grow up playing or anything like that. I just think it's just a big business now, and people are trying to get scholarships for their children, and they want to try to get as much ice and I guess development as they can.
Yeah, certainly there's that business side of it, but there were a couple instances in the book where I was struck just by how players looked out for each other during your career. In particular, obviously you sort of touched on it already, but what did your friendship with Brian Boucher mean to you after you both got to the pros? And I think there was another time you talked about when you were with the Junior Red Wings and Paul Coffey went out of his way to help you.
That's what's great about hockey. It's such a team sport. Even in the guys. In the locker room, you learn respect. And these older guys coming in, and I did the same. The rookies and these young players, you kind of, I guess, look over them and kind of show them the way. And obviously, you talk about in the book with Coffey with the skate blade and giving me a longer blade. And he was kind of a rink rat. We were, when I went to junior, I didn't go to school, so I was at the rink, and we get to watch the Red Wings. We were lucky enough to play, practice out of Joe Louis. So we were there early. We'd get to watch them skate, and then we'd go on and play ball hockey on the ice. And some of the Red Wings would kind of come on with us and play. So it was lucky that way. But Coffey still, still every time I see him, we're still good friends. And it's just, and obviously he was a player that I looked up to his style. That's, along with Leach and Chelios and Koff and those guys that I looked up to as a young player. So that's why I think hockey is such a great sport. Literally, you kind of you learn respect, and also you demand respect at a young age.
Just for those that have not read the book or will, could you explain in further detail what Paul did for you in junior in regards to helping you adjust your skate blade? Sure.
So Paul Coffey was he skated with us, played some ball hockey at Joe Louis Arena, and he kind of took a liking to me, obviously, with my style. I think he caught a couple games at the Joe when I played him, and knew I was an offensive defenseman. He used to skate, and he was, I consider myself a pretty fast skater, and he would just he was twice as fast as I was, and basically, I just put it this way, I did the red line. He was already at the far blue line pretty much when we kind of have like little races. But he just grabbed my skates one day and he basically said, "Come with me." And we went into the Detroit locker room, and he grabbed his head equipment guy, and he put bigger blades on my skates. At that time I wore about probably a 9 1/4 skate, and at that time I think there was a 280 tuck back then, and he actually basically the biggest blade I could fit on was a 288. Actually, the plastic toe actually hung over, so they actually kind of put more rivets in it to basically kind of strengthen the plastic so it wouldn't, obviously snap on you or anything. But he wanted me to have a bigger blade on the ice for more of a glide speed. Especially for me, I kind of took guys wide and we kind of cut in on goalies when we used to rush the puck or spin up. So he wanted me to have a little bit more glide speed. And right away, I could tell the difference. And obviously, I wore those for the rest of my career. I still wear them today. It's tough now, though, because I got to buy my own skates and find a trainer that can put on 288s.
Earlier today, we talked about a portion of the book you were going to read. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to read a little bit of your book right now for us and our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of have one right in front of me here. It's going to be in third person, which will be a little weird. But I just want to read the intro because I want to tell a lot of listeners as well. It is a sports book. It's a hockey book, but obviously I've dealt with some things with my eye injury and then some insurance fraud, financial fraud. So it's not just a sports book. So I'll just read this and take a couple minutes here. But I'll read it again. I'll sound a little weird in third person, but here we go. On March 11, 2000, Bryan Berard's life changed forever. One moment he was a young hockey star, a former first overall pick in the NHL draft, an Olympian who had a long, bright career ahead of him. The next moment, he was on the ice, his eyes flashed open by a wayward stick. After Berard's terrible injury, his sight in his right eye was seriously compromised. He endured one operation after another, but it seemed certain that his playing days were over. Bit by bit, Berard rebuilt himself. He learned to catch and throw again. He retaught himself how to pass and shoot the puck, and he began to see the game unfold on the ice with new clarity. With the support of his family and his own inner determination, Berard not only recovered, but made a triumphant return to the NHL. Just 2 years after his injury, miraculously, the worst was behind him. There were storm clouds on the horizon. However, injuries continued to plague Berard throughout the rest of his career. He left North America for the wild world of Russian professional hockey to continue to play the game he loved. Accusations of steroid use cast a shadow over his accomplishments, and then, just as he was about to retire, Berard learned that his longtime financial advisor had defrauded him and several other hockey players out of millions of dollars. Despite every setback, Berard refused to give up. He nearly lost an eye, but he never lost sight of what was most important in his life. Funny, honest, and inspiring, Relentless is a tribute to the resilience and perseverance of the human spirit. There you go.
Thanks, Bryan. Now you got practice for the audio book.
Exactly.
I do want to ask you a little bit about. We're recording this on March 10th. Tomorrow is March 11th. It's 20 years since the injury. I don't want to dwell entirely on it because there's so much more in the book to talk about, but it is important to ask you how much of that night for the book purposes was just recall memory, and how much of it was Jim prompting you to go back and revisit it, or was it fresh in your mind type of thing, or something you'd forgotten about? When you had to cover that chapter, and it was a very rough chapter. I won't lie to you. I actually. The rule of this podcast is we have to read every book, and I had that was the hardest chapter I've ever had to deal with in any book we've ever read. So back to my question is, how much of it was recall and how much of it was just it's fresh in your mind?
This is the only credit I will not give Jim for. It was fresh in my mind. It always has been. And a lot of people ask me, and a lot of people say this was the toughest chapter, and a lot of my friends and said a lot of times they either cried or tears in their eye. But for me, it just kind of obviously I've watched it. I've watched the accident probably over 1,000 times. So it's kind of fresh. I kind of remember everything. So for me, it was kind of easy. I don't say easy, but people ask me, was this a tough kind of to think about or reminisce about. And unfortunately, it was an accident that happened. There was nothing I could do about it. So for me to kind of talk about it, I have no issues with it or I guess get upset about it. It happened, and that's kind of how I lived my life and kind of was able to come back and play. It's just a day at a time. But yeah, so I that night, do you want me to get in and kind of explain what happened and how it happened?
Yeah, I whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, sure. I remember basically just being in front of the net. I obviously knew Cujo was behind me. The only thing I couldn't remember was if we were killing a penalty or not. And I know I was covering Hoster in front of the net, and kind of I was off him a little bit. He was in a high slot, and I just remember Matt's kind of picking off a pass that was intended. Matt Sundin picked off a pass that was intended for Hossa or coming to the slot. And I think obviously Hossa was going to one-time it. It was kind of pissed off that the pass didn't get to him. And I saw an opportunity to kind of jump up into play and kind of maybe make an odd man rush with Matt. And as soon as I turned around and kind of jumped up into play, honestly, I did not see it coming. At that time, I did not wear a visor, and I wasn't able to close my eye. And the way the stick hit me pretty hard, it fractured above my right eye. It fractured, obviously, my orbital, fractured my cheekbone, and the pressure was more of a pressure cut. So obviously I had stitches too. So from the top of my eyebrow, it basically sliced my eyeball pretty much exploded. So it sliced me from up top, right into the top of my cheekbone. So I basically just had a big slash across, and my eye did the same thing. My eye kind of exploded and kind of was split in half. I knew I was in trouble right away because it basically obviously went completely black. Then I could as I went down, I was kind of wailing a little bit, and everyone said, did it hurt? It was a lot of pain. Honestly, it wasn't. It was just I knew. I didn't know if I lost my eye right away, but I knew I couldn't see. So I was kind of yelling to Cujo, I can't see. And then I could feel the blood just kind of pouring out, because as I got up, and you can see in the previews, I kind of get up, and you can kind of see my right hand almost disappear as I kind of pushed myself up, because that's how much blood it was. It actually ruptured 2 arteries, and so it was a lot of blood. So as Chris Broadhurst got to me, Broadway got to me, and kind of Jonas Hoagland got to me as well. They kind of carried me off, and all the guys were like, it's a lot of blood. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And as I got back into the locker room, there was a few guys that weren't playing. I think either healthy scratches or injured. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was Gary Volk and I think big Chris McAllister. And as a doctor got to me, he put an eye wash in my eye, and I could see their faces and his faces, and I knew his face, and I knew I was in trouble. And they basically said, we got to get him to the hospital as soon as possible. So I was still kind of in my gear. I still, I remember today, I basically had shirt off, and I wore a girdle back then, so I had my girdle on and kind of just put flip-flops on, and they took me in an ambulance to the hospital, and obviously I was covering my face. And we get to the first hospital in Ottawa, and same thing. They kind of obviously rushed me right in, and kind of sit in like a dentist-style chair in the emergency room. And a bunch of doctors obviously knew I was on my way and came flying in. And the same thing, they were kind of like, it's just a lot of blood. And one of the doctors took the eye wash again and kind of squirted in my eye to clear the blood out. And right away, he kind of looked at the other doctors and literally said, we cannot do this here. And I was like, what do you mean you can't do this here? This is a hospital. He says, we need to get you to a trauma center. And that's where I kind of lost it. I kind of got up right away, and I kind of almost like a panic attack. And I know I went for a barrel. I think I threw up. And I remember a nurse kind of hit me in the butt with some kind of meds or something. And that was it. That knocked me out. And I remember waking up the next morning in a hospital. That's when I kind of learned that, I was in surgery for about 8 hours. They rushed me to an eye trauma center, where the doctors, thank God. I mean, I still have my eye today. It is obviously smaller. People seeing pictures because I lost a gland inside the eye from the deep cut that produces basically. If you guys go to the eye doctor and they test for pressure, I lost that gland, so I basically have silicone in my eye to keep it in shape, so it doesn't produce fluid anymore inside to keep it that big or that shape. So that's why it's as small as it is today. But obviously the doctors sewed me back up, and I lost my lens, I lost my iris, the coloring in my eye, and my retina was very, very badly damaged.
And your vision is you had to have what, 2400 vision to return to the NHL, correct?
I did, and so I woke up in the hospital, and Brent Smith, who was one of the trainers with Toronto, with the Leafs, he stayed with me overnight. So when I woke up and I said to him, I said, I want to see the doctors. I want to talk to the doctors and kind of want to know what happened. And they're like, oh, your parents are on their way. Which the Leafs the organization was unbelievable. They sent my parents a private plane from Rhode Island, picked them up. They were trying to get there that night. It was actually a snowstorm, so we couldn't get there for the next day. But I said, I'm 23 years old. And I said, I want to see the doctors now. So the doctors came in, and they took me into a dark room, and they said, Bryan, most likely you're probably going to lose your eye. We have to watch it for the next 2 to 4 weeks, make sure no infection. But we did the best we could to save your eye, and we don't see ever seeing anything ever again out of that eye. So the first thing I thought is obviously, hopefully I can keep my eye, and the second was my NHL career is done. So that was tough to kind of deal with, and Brent Smith was great. He was there for some support, but they took the bandages off, and I'm in a dark room, and they put a flashlight, shine a flashlight in my eye, and I see the light. And the doctors all they were almost amazed. And so that gave me hope a little bit. But as the days went on, there was just so much bleeding inside the eye that the blood, they had to wait for the blood to basically stop, the eye to stop bleeding, and then the blood to clot. So as the blood started clotting, as the days went on, I was getting less and less vision. And unfortunately, blood is toxic to your retina. So just my retina was sitting inside all that blood and did so much damage to the retina that honestly, I'm legally blind, and pretty much, at that time I did not have 2400. We used a contact lens to kind of get me to that level to 2400. But Dr. Stanley Chang, who did all the surgeries after to repair my retina and try to get as much vision back in that eye, knew I wanted to play. And to be honest with you, I played with one eye. I mean, I did not wear the contact lens when I played. There's so many lawyers at the time that said the NHL can't deny you work. It's kind of interesting that Casey Martin, I don't know if you guys remember that. You guys are up my age, but the golfer that used the cart because he had the bad hip or the limp or whatever. I guess he had a big lawsuit too with the PGA because they didn't want him to be able to use a cart. So So I knew really the NHL wasn't going to stop me. So when I was kind of determined to try to, I guess, prove myself wrong and prove everybody else wrong that I could come back and play in the league with one eye, that's what I wanted to do.
I mean, we've all heard of 20/20 vision, but and I don't mean this to be a tough question or a rude question, but what is 20/400 vision?
I mean, it's legally blind. I mean, it's basically, when you're sitting in that chair, it's the big E on the eye chart. So, and I couldn't even see that. I mean, with the contact lens, I just kind of, it's pretty obvious it's a big E, so I kind of just, to be honest, I just kind of cheated. Oh, yeah, I can see it. Because every team I went to, at the beginning, they would do a test, and then afterwards, I don't think the league, they knew I could play. I guess really the only person I was in danger with was myself, playing with one eye. So, the league was great to be able to let me play. And I was. I mean, I came back, and obviously I played, I think it was 6 or 7 years with one eye, but as I played more, I started to adapt, and obviously, I think my numbers kind of showed for it that I started putting up some good offensive numbers as I kept playing. Unfortunately, the back is what ended my career. I mean, at 32 years old, at 30, I had the 2 back surgeries when I was in Columbus. Fortunately, those doctors kind of screwed up, and I should have had 1 surgery and fix 2 discs at once. They missed that, so I actually had to have 2 back surgeries. And then after the back surgeries, I mean, I lost the skating. Obviously, was my asset. I lost my skate. I lost probably a step or 2. So, it's just that's what ended my career.
And we wanted to ask, too, like when you were first there in the hospital, you mentioned Senators players came to visit you. Like, what did it sort of mean to have Marian Hossa come to the hospital so fairly quickly to see you and be able to, start sorting through all the emotion that was probably attached to it?
That was that wasn't the toughest. Steve Thomas jumped back on a flight first thing early morning and flew back and visited me in Ottawa. That was probably tough. We both cried and shared that. That kind of can get me still today when we talk about it. But yeah, I mean, it was very nice. Wade Redden, Alfredson brought Hossa to the hospital. I was friendly with Redden and Alfredson a little bit, so they brought him and myself and Hossa kind of shared a cry as well, and I could tell it affected him. And obviously, it's hockey. It was a freak accident. I thought the stick, I don't think had to be swung like that, but again, I kind of I didn't see it coming. I didn't expect it. And it was just a freak accident. I wasn't able to close my eye in time, and unfortunately, unfortunately had that injury.
Now, is it significant to you that Hossa went on to have like a really stellar career?
Oh, he's a great player. I mean, he was a great player then, and he played forever. I mean, the guy was a big horse. It was good to see him kind of get over it. I know he talked about struggle for a couple of years and thought about it a lot, which I understand. It's just there was no hard feelings, and still isn't today.
Yeah, and essentially you absolved him so early on. He did go through that slump, but perhaps in a way you allowed him to live that dream of 3 cups and doing what he did by absolving him right off the bat.
I hope so. I mean, again, I heard that he was struggling, and I kept telling him. I said, it's hockey, it's sports, and accidents happen, and that's the way I had to look at it. Not only for him, not only for himself, but for my own kind of my own, I guess, thoughts or my own brain. I didn't want to look back and say, what if? I mean, I do today. I'm saying as if I would have loved to see what type of player I could have been playing, having a long career and playing with 2 eyes, and especially there in Toronto when we had such a kind of running gun style team with Pat Quinn, and it was a lot of fun, and that locker room was great it was kind of. It was awesome, I guess, to wake up and go to the rink every morning when we were there. And a lot of times, I mean, everyone says, how can it not be every day? But hockey is a job as well. And sometimes when you're struggling and your confidence isn't, and you're not playing great, and the fans are all over you, it's sometimes it's a downer too. But I was having such a good time in Toronto at that time. Again, I was 23. I was single. I was living in Toronto. We had a fun locker room. We had a good team. The city was behind us, and I thought we could have had, and they still did without me. But I thought we could have had, with Caberlet back there, myself, we could have had a long career together.
Even had a couple of European guys that used to crush cigarettes in the laundry room.
Absolutely, the Russian mafia. Those guys were great. I mean, the locker room was just every day was fun. I mean, the guys like obviously Glenn Healy, Chris King, I mean, Ty Domi, those guys would fight nonstop and then busting each other's balls. It was a really fun time. And then Pat Quinn, I mean, he just old school hockey. I mean, obviously, you look back and then games changed, but we had beers in the locker room, red wine, and he would smoke a cigar. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, and as long as we go out at night and after games, if we had a day off or we were at practice, and Pat knew as long as we came to the rink the next day and worked hard. I mean, Pat, I talk about in the book a few times, I'd be out late. It was like he knew right away. It was like the phone calls from us that came in, and he'd walk through the team lounge, and I'd be having a coffee with the heat back on my back, and he'd kind of bust me up and say, "Hey, Berard, I heard you had your dancing shoes on last night at the old Fluid, the club in Toronto." So it was pretty, it was fun. It was just a fun time, and Pat was a pleasure to play for.
You talked about Steve Thomas. Can you explain how you guys became friends? I know it probably started when you was your veteran roommate, correct?
He was, correct, yeah. He's got to be the most well-liked guy in hockey as well. He's just a great guy, great teammate, tough little bastard. I mean, he'd fight, he'd score. Just a pleasure for me, and especially, and it was still, when I got traded, it was my third year in the league, so I'm pretty much still a young kid, and he was great to I guess room with on the road. That's when we had roommates. I guess today now everyone's kind of has their own room, so the roommates it made it fun. I mean, again, it's just it's such a great sport.
Did you know in that game on March 11th, 2000, after you went out, he actually scored on the power play, and did you know you had an assist in that game?
I did not. That I did not know. I don't really remember much of that game besides the eye injury, to be honest.
No, that's fair. Okay, moving on. What's day-to-day life like for Bryan Berard right now in terms of managing injuries and in terms of what you do for work?
Injuries are tough. I can get into that. For work, got a few things going on. I'm actually involved in finance. I work for Whale Rock Point Partners out of Providence, Rhode Island. It's a wealth management firm. I've been there for about 6 years. And I got involved with them with a family friend. And to be honest with you, I wish I would have met them probably about 25 years ago. Because obviously with the financial situation, I got myself into fraud. I wouldn't be in that situation today. Harvard hockey player, Brad Norman and Tyson Reed are the two partners. So really I don't give any financial advice on business development. So I just go out and we're in the retirement business as well. So big 401k plans for businesses and then individual wealth. So basically just kind of set up meetings for them. Great guys to work for, great environment. I'm involved with Mount St. Charles Hockey, which that's my old high school. Guys like Keith Carney, Matthew Schneider, Gar Snow, myself. Brian Lawton was the first American. So very, very deep hockey tradition here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, where I was born and raised. We started a new program this year, the Hockey Academy, Mount St. Charles Hockey Academy. So we started a U14, a U15, a U16, and a U18 program, which the kids dorm now. It's become a boarding school again. And I'm on the ice. If I'm in town and not traveling for work, I'm on the ice usually once or twice a week with those guys. Just player development, just kind of helping the defense, helping the coaches with some power play stuff, some offensive face-off, things like that, which I really enjoy. I've been out of the game for so long. It's the first year that I've kind of been back involved in hockey. And I'm having a lot of fun with it, especially the younger kids. So I'd like to try to get back involved in the NHL with hopefully an organization to kind of work with some player development. I just really enjoy working with the young kids, especially in that age between 14 to 18, and then once the draft kids get picked, it'd be fun to work with those kids. And then I'm involved with a real estate project down in Cabo San Lucas called Diamante, a golf resort that I'm kind of traveling back and forth from there too. So keeps myself busy, keeps myself out of trouble. As far as the injuries, body is definitely starting to get out 43, but left hip is something I probably need a new hip pretty soon. And then obviously my back surgery is probably pretty tough, but I enjoy golf in the summer, and looks like I probably have to get my neck done. I need 2 herniated discs in my neck, so if I want to continue golf, I got to probably get that done as well. So I think I need to go away for a year and get all the surgeries done at once so I can come back a new man.
You're talking about the financial work, and what came to my mind were parallels between you and Derek Sanderson in that both of you, you had your careers end prematurely, albeit they're completely different reasons why that happened. And then you got into kind of working in finance, not necessarily managing the money, but bringing business in. Derek Sanderson, of course, worked for State Street. And then the more I looked into it. I realized that there's the connection of Phil Kenner, the gentleman you talked about off the top, who was a fraudster essentially, and you helped bring him down. He came out of State Street. Have you ever, considering the New England connection with Derek Sanderson, have you ever talked with Derek about that? Because I know Phil was at State Street and then left and created this fraudulent company that ended up affecting so many players.
Yeah, unfortunately, Derek was a great guy. I mean, Derek, I talked to him after that and before, but that's how I met Derek Sanderson. He was kind of doing what I do now with Whale Rock, and he was with Phil Kenner at State Street. They actually came to my parents' house when I was 17 years old. That's how I was introduced to Kenner and Sanderson. Derek had nothing to do with Phil being a fraudster. So kind of, and I want to make that clear because Derek was a great guy and had nothing to do with anything like that. It's when Phil left State Street. He went on to a couple other companies, and when he went on his own is when he kind of, really, we don't know what happened. We know that he just stole a lot of money, and kind of when he went on his own is when he kind of turned into a real bad person. And the worst thing about it, he was a friend. I mean, he stayed at my house probably 2 times for Christmas when he was traveling. I mean, I knew him since I was 17-year-old, so something went squirrely upstairs and really just kind of started taking advantage of the guys. And it was right around 2008, 2009, too, when everything kind of crashed. So I think he was over his head and then just tried to get out of it by really just stealing our money. So unfortunate that Derek Sanderson was kind of tied up with that name, Phil Kenner.
And now you were talking about, the challenges of with health, and you make a point near the end of the book to just talk about how what after your playing days you had therapy. How much did you want to make that point for other players who face and all the stresses they face throughout their careers?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, even with the mental health, my younger brother suffered with that as well. So my family's familiar with it. And I think a lot of people are scared to talk about it. And that's why, absolutely, when I did Battle of the Blades here in Toronto, I skated for, the Ottawa Mental Health Hospital and for Ottawa and Do It for Darren, which was a tough situation for Luke Richardson and Steph Richardson's daughter. But I really wanted to get that word out there. And when my career was done, I did deal with some anger issues. So I was kind of angry with obviously my injury and what kind of, obviously then with the finances. So, a therapist out of New York helped me a lot to deal with the kind of my anger. And it's, I'm not shy to talk about it. And I think you see a lot of athletes now coming up, but what's the swimmer there that's got some great commercials about his therapist helping out a lot too. So it's good to talk about. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we can help people and save people's lives.
I just wanted to also mention, as we were winding down here, we made a small donation to the Do It for Darren Foundation on your behalf today for joining us. But no problem. And that was, of course, the when you did Battle of the Blades, that was the charity you chose for the windfall. Nate, did you have a question? Okay. Well, I actually just switching gears. One of the most enjoyable chapters in the book for me was when you went to Russia. And, we obviously cover a lot of books here. We've read a lot of books. And I look back on Dave King. Coach Dave King did King of Russia. And now his version of Russia is a little more tame, but definitely it kind of explains the Wild Wild West. Jamie McLennan also played in the KHL, and that was the first year of the KHL. Both of you guys played there. You played for different teams. His account in his book, Best Seat in the House, is very eye-opening. Was there anything that was left out of that chapter? Because I got the feeling that could have gone on. Oh,
there's a lot of things left out. One thing I not argued, but Simon Schuster was right. We wanted to do a book that my mom would be proud of, and my nieces and nephews could read, and the kids. Obviously, it's an inspiring book, so that's what we wanted to. But maybe later on, once I'm a little older, we'll maybe do a rated R version or something of maybe even a podcast or something. Tell some great stories. I mean, I was a single guy too, so I'm still single today, but it was. I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And I lived with a couple of North Americans as well, so. and our guy, the owner of that team in Beatties, I believe his name was Nikolai. I believe he's in jail today, unfortunately. But he treated us very well, and the ladies did as well. I guess we could put it that way.
You left out his last name. Was that on purpose, or did you actually ever know the owner's last name?
I knew his name, but I left that. I'll leave that out on purpose, that's for sure. But I can't say anything about him because he treated us very, very well. He loved boxing and he loved hockey, but he was definitely a mob boss, and obviously I grew up here in Rhode Island too, so I'm familiar with the two mob bosses, the Italian side. But it's it was a lot of just a lot of fun. It's hockey and fun. Let's just put it that way.
And he actually, going back to Phil Kenner, he actually kind of got a gut feeling about Phil, right?
He did, and thank God he would have stole more money from myself and Chris Simon, because Chris Simon was a client as well. And he would not. We were due for a paycheck, basically not even a paycheck. We were due for a bag of cash. And he knew, because he owned the hotel, he knew Phil was staying there. Phil kind of got a wind of it too, and Phil was kind of hiding out, and then thank God just took off. And as soon as Phil took off, he knew he was gone. He paid both me and Chris. So he kind of had an idea. I wish I kind of at that time had a little bit of an idea too. Obviously, I was already approached by the feds before I left New York to fly over there, so I kind of knew something was up. Excuse me. That's what kind of, to get into that Russian story, that's what kind of I guess kind of a light bulb went off in my head that I kind of could have made a mistake and lost a lot of money to Phil when the feds approached me before that season in KHL. So I went through a lot of emails and started just talking to other of his clients, and especially with Chris. And then I started talking to an ex-police officer, John Kaiser, out in New York. And none of the stories started matching up, so I knew we were in big trouble. And I knew the nest egg that and I guess I could blame. I did spend, I did have fun, and I did spend a lot of money as well. But I thought I built some investments where, especially in real estate, would produce cash flow, so I would have a little bit of a nest egg when I retired, and gave me some time to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And then also at the same time, my real estate investments I thought would kind of pay off, and I be sitting comfortably.
Where does that all stand now in the book? You mentioned you went to see Phil and Tommy Constantine in jail, in the holding cell. Is that all settled now in the sense of, or where are you?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. I'm actually heading to New York on St. Patty's Day to have a few Guinnesses, but also March 18th is finally, after 6 years, he's been in jail for 6 years. And so I'm sure we'll probably do something with Simon & Schuster, maybe with the paperback or something, I hope. But he gets sentenced March 18th finally. And the government has reached out to me, and they want me to kind of go in front of the court and I guess kind of explain my hardship and what happened. So I think a lot of victims, or hopefully a few victims, will do this. So hopefully we'll add some more years on Tommy and Phil Kenner's sentence.
I have one last question tying to Russia. Could you just tell our listeners the story about your bodyguard leaving the Glock on the table and what he told you?
Yeah. So we stayed at the hotel for a while, myself and Chris, and then we just kind of get tired of hotels. So they basically found us a nice house, rented us a house, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Chekhov was kind of a small town, but there wasn't much around. It was basically a few other houses and wild dogs we could hear pretty much every night. But the first night we moved in, and we're kind of pretty pumped that the house actually had an indoor pool, heated indoor pool. It was like an old log cabin with a big sauna, but we get a knock on the door pretty late at night. Me and Chris are kind of just watching TV. He basically brought in a Glock. He brought in a 9mm with rubber tip bullets, and a ton of ammunition too, and a bunch of clips. And he basically said, late at night, if you guys hear any knocks on the doors or anything, one of you guys start shooting, and one of you guys call us as quick as you can. It's like, what? Where the hell am I?
Shoot first and then call me.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, my bedroom was up on the second floor. Chris was on the first, and so he grabbed the gun. And obviously, growing up in Wawa, he's familiar hunting, so I felt pretty safe with Big Chris in the house anyway, big chief. But he was. So he grabbed the gun, and I was like, Jesus. I said, I'll have the cell phone, and I'll call him, because our bodyguard. basically we were provided with bodyguards and drivers as well. We did have a car that we drive back and forth from the rink, but if we did want to go anywhere, like into Moscow and stuff, that the owner provided us with. They were young kids too, but they spoke pretty good English and pretty scary. I mean, they all carried the guns. They didn't really carry. They carried more knives, and most of the kids were cut up pretty good. I don't know if they kind of would get pretty shit-faced or drunk and kind of, I don't know if I could swear on the podcast, sorry, but I think they used to, they would, I don't know if they practiced knife fighting or something, because all of them were kind of cut up on their arms. You could see the scars and from blades. So I think a lot of them would kind of, get drunk and kind of fool around and fight with the knives, or it was just from, getting in some knife fights. But yeah, it was again, Wild West, and he had an unbelievable compound. I talk about, he probably had this compound that was all gated, and he had exotic furs and these big exotic dogs as well. These dogs must have been over 200 some pounds. He's breeding those. He had a wild wolf on property that he probably caged in with about an acre. The guy had some amazing some amazing toys, and he also had a big Russian sauna on the property too. So it was interesting, that's for sure. It was fun. This
was the owner of the team. Okay, Bryan, first of all, I just want to thank you for giving us so much of your time today. Of course, as I mentioned, me and Nate are both around your age, and we remember when Felix Potvin was traded for a Russian defenseman. That was the joke. I think there was a Mike Smith joke that he wanted a Russian defenseman, and it was an American named Bryan Berard that could fly on the ice. So, so yes, thanks again, and all the best. And we enjoyed the book, and thank you for joining us today on SportsLit.
Well, I appreciate you guys reading it, and I appreciate you guys having me on. It was fun. So thank you guys very much.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.